haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The galaxy was a cathedral of fading stars, their light trickling like dying candles through a vault of endless black. Around the dim edges of Segmentum Obscurus, ancient watch stations drifted like forgotten reliquaries, their sensors fixed on the void beyond the spiral arms. It was there, in the silence between constellations, that whispers began to coil, snatches of psychic echoes, half-remembered signals, and impossible heartbeats moving across the intergalactic gulf. Whole systems had collapsed before, entire empires had withered to ash. But this felt older, more deliberate, as if something vast and patient were drawing breath after a long sleep. The Imperium's banners still fluttered in gold and black, yet every fabric was frayed, and every oath carried the scent of dust. We have watched so many worlds rise and vanish, and we truly care about you who listen now. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. On a rust-red outpost called Arcturus Halo, a single scholar stood before an observation dome whose plasteel panes had turned opaque from age. His name in the administratum rolls was Ver Kyle, Magos Xenologis, second rank, though few remembered or cared. He had spent decades staring at the same stretch of emptiness, cataloguing rogue comets and dead transmissions, a monk of data lost in a monastery of cold steel. Yet tonight, or what passed for night in this orbit, something pressed at the edges of his consciousness like claws testing a membrane. His auspex displayed nothing but static. His mind, however, thrummed with the pulse of approaching hunger. He turned from the dome to the bank of memory cores that lined the chamber like tombstones. Each held centuries of reports, sightings of drifting biomass, warp disturbances, astropathic screams truncated mid-syllable. He had filed them all in silence, knowing the Ordo Xenos preferred ambiguity to alarm. That was the contract of his position. Observe, record, do not interpret. But as he touched one rune-etched casing, a flicker of doubt moved through him. What if his obedience had built the very silence that now threatened them? The Imperium had promised him purpose when he was inducted as a child. They had taken his eyes and given him augmetics, removed his name and clothed him in red, taught him to measure stars like grains of salt. Loyalty had been his armor. Yet he had also inherited his father's secret, a family line once tied to a forbidden research enclave on a nameless moon near the galactic rim. That enclave had vanished centuries ago under charges of heresy. Its records were sealed. Only in dreams did he glimpse vats of alien tissue, tendrils twisting under glass. Tonight those dreams bled into waking. Kyle activated the main auspex array. Green lines swept across the void, then collapsed into erratic spikes. At first, he thought it was another warp storm, but the pattern repeated. No, breathed. It resembled a heartbeat, but one too large for any creature, too slow for any machine. He whispered the litany of verification, trying to steady his augmetic hands. The spikes grew taller. Somewhere beyond the halo stars, something was moving toward the galaxy, swallowing the psychic light like a tide pulling back from shore. He sent a low-priority ping to the Segmentum relay, couched in bureaucratic codes to avoid censorship. Within minutes, a reply arrived. Not from his superiors, but from a private channel bearing a sigil he recognized from childhood. The Ophidian seal. His stomach clenched. The seal belonged to a project officially erased from Imperial records, a project whispered about only in initiation rites. It was the mark of the serpent gene, the experiment that had tried to graft alien resilience into human stock. He had never expected to see it flicker on his screen like a ghost. The message was brief. "We know what you have seen. Do not transmit again. No name, no data, only a string of coordinates pointing to a dead moon called Zara's Wake." He sat back, the cold of the dome seeping through his robes. Loyalty, secrecy, survival. These had been his guiding stars. But he felt them dimming now, one by one. Was this the Imperium's hand reaching out to silence him, or a remnant of something even older? His rival at the Ordo, Inquisitor Serac, would certainly prefer him gone. Serac had risen quickly by erasing inconvenient truths. Yet Karl could not shake the thought that the seal's reappearance was not a threat, but a summons, an invitation to witness what had been hidden. Beyond the dome, the dying starfield flickered. For a heartbeat, he saw not pinpricks of light but countless eyes staring inward, blank and lidless. He blinked and they were gone, leaving only the patient dark. The Auspex beeped once more. Another spike, larger. The rhythm of it was unmistakable now, a hunger rising, cresting, inevitable. He remembered the old catechism taught to initiates of the Mechanicus. All knowledge is holy, but some truths unmake the seeker. His father had whispered a different version before disappearing into the sealed archives. All knowledge devours. Kyle felt that devouring begin inside him, a slow erosion of certainty. If he stayed silent, the Imperium would remain blind until the swarm arrived. If he spoke, Serac would brand him a heretic, and the Officio Assassinorum would cut his life short before the first tendrils reached real space. He looked again at the coordinates. Zara's Wake lay beyond sanctioned routes, a barren sphere of stone, but rumors persisted of a gene vault buried under its crust, a place where Imperial science had once trespassed too far. If the seal had reappeared, the vault might still hold records, or living specimens. The thought filled him with equal parts dread and exhilaration. Outside, the star Arcturus halo dimmed fractionally, though its fusion heart should burn for millennia yet. Kyle imagined it as a candle flickering before the wind. In that image, he saw himself, a solitary flame, dutiful but fragile, poised at the edge of being snuffed out. His entire life had been an act of waiting for the next directive, the next transmission, the next justification for his silence. Perhaps this was what his father had foreseen, that one day the waiting would end, and he would have to choose. He closed the Auspex, severing the relay, and stood before the dome. The void stretched infinite, but he sensed movement within it, like a predator shifting in tall grass. He pressed his palm to the cold pane, feeling the tremor of his own pulse against the metal. Words formed in his mind, unbidden. The choir of hunger is waking. He whispered a prayer not from the Mechanicus, but from his mother's folk, a nameless human dialect older than the Imperium. The syllables tasted of iron and ash. For the first time in decades, he felt alive, not as a component of a machine, but as a man standing on the edge of revelation. Tomorrow, or whatever passed for tomorrow out here, he would set a course for Zara's Wake. He would find the vault. He would see with his own eyes whether humanity's arrogance had summoned the darkness now rolling toward them. And if the truth devoured him, at least he would face it awake. Beyond the glass, the stars flickered again. This time, they did not return. Only a thin grey glow remained, like teeth beneath a veil. The void shuddered. Kyle turned away, and the echo of the heartbeat followed him into the corridor, steady, patient, impossible to unhear. The transport skiff was little more than a steel lung bolted to an engine. but it carried Verkel through the dark like a seed of defiance. Days, if such a word had meaning beyond the halo, bled together in a dull hum of life support systems and flickering lumen strips. He sat alone among sealed crates marked with Mechanicus runes, fingers tracing the Ophidian seal burned into the message that had summoned him. Each vibration of the hull seemed to echo the pulse he had felt at the watch station, as though the hunger itself had climbed aboard and now slept under his skin. Yet beneath the dread, there flickered a dangerous clarity. He was leaving the safety of sanctioned ignorance, stepping into the forgotten corridor between secrecy and revelation. Through the narrow view slit, he watched stars slide by, their light muted by warp dust. Each one was a memory, a system catalogued, a world reported on, a silence filed. He wondered if the stars remembered him in return, a faceless Magos who had spent his life measuring them. The coordinates to Zara's wake glimmered on his data slate like a forbidden prayer. He whispered the litany of trajectory anyway, half out of habit, half to convince himself that he still belonged to something larger than his own fear. At first, he had expected pursuit. Inquisitor Serac did not let anomalies drift free. But no Voxhail came, no assassin in the cargo bay, no interdictor ship sliding from warp behind him. The absence felt heavier than any threat. Either Serac had dismissed him as irrelevant, or the rival's hand reached deeper, waiting at the destination. Kyle imagined Serac's pale eyes behind a rebreather mask, patient and calculating. They had once studied together under the same mentor, debating xenobiology over weak recaf, believing knowledge could shield the Imperium from its own excesses. Then Serac had chosen ascension through silence, while Coil clung to the slow, unglamorous path of truth. Perhaps betrayal was not a sudden knife, but a long erosion, like starlight thinning over eons. The skiff jolted as it pierced the outer gravity of Zara's wake. Through the slit, he saw a barren sphere of stone and ice, its surface scoured by ancient impacts. A faint aurora shimmered across the poles, fed by a weak magnetic field, a ghost of atmosphere long stripped away. In Mechanicus archives, the moon was listed as lifeless, a relic of a failed mining colony. Yet his father's whispered stories had always placed a gene vault here, hidden under crustal strata, sealed with wards older than the Imperium's founding. He guided the skiff into a cragged canyon and powered down the engine. Dust settled like grey snow over the hull. The silence outside pressed inward, thicker than vacuum. Carl donned his environmental suit, the red of his robes muted under frost-white plating, and stepped onto the surface. His boots crunched on shattered rock, the sound swallowed almost instantly by thin air. In the distance stood the ruins of prefabricated habs, their walls collapsed inward as if something had sucked out their breath centuries ago. He moved toward a fissure marked on his slate. It gaped like a scar, rimmed with frost. Beneath the ice he glimpsed faint lines, carvings, serpentine runes etched in a language his augmetics could not translate. The Ophidian seal pulsed faintly on his screen, aligning with the fissure. He keyed a code his father had taught him in a forgotten dialect of Binaric. The ice cracked, a slow groan rising from the depths. A panel of stone shifted inward, revealing a stairwell descending into darkness. Warm air exhaled from below, carrying a smell that was neither machine nor organic, but something between spice and ozone, metal and blood. Cal's heart stuttered. He activated his shoulder lamp and began to descend. The stairwell walls bore murals of coiling shapes, human silhouettes entwined with alien forms, skulls blooming into mandibles, hands stretching into claws. The style was unmistakably Imperial Gothic, yet infused with a rhythm alien to its own iconography. It was a history painted by those who believed they were writing a myth into flesh. Each step downward felt like a step backward in time, toward a moment when ambition had eclipsed fear. He emerged into a chamber vast enough to swallow a cathedral. Vaulted ribs of black stone, arched overhead, strung with cables like tendons. In the center lay a series of glass cylinders, each taller than a man, their contents murky under dim lumen glow. Some were cracked, others empty, but a few still held shapes suspended in viscous fluid. Kyle approached the nearest. Within floated a coiled mass of tissue, pale, veined, studded with spines. It twitched once, a ripple moving along its length, then went still. A console jutted from the floor, its surface coated in dust, but still humming faintly. He wiped it with his glove, revealing a single rune, Ophidian Primus. His breath fogged the visor. He keyed a low-level awakening sequence. Data cascaded across the screen, fragments of research logs in a dozen dead dialects. He read, Objective: integrate non-human adaptability into human genome for void survival. Success threshold 0.07%. Subjective anomaly, emergent collective instinct. Another line blinked. Terminated by inquisitorial decree, M40 by 73. Yet the vault was not terminated. It had endured, sealed, forgotten, patient, like the hunger in the void. As he scrolled further, the words blurred. He saw diagrams of spore creatures resembling embryonic Tyranids, annotated with human genetic markers. His pulse hammered. If these records were true, the Imperium had not merely studied alien biology, it had seeded it, perhaps even exiled prototypes into the intergalactic dark to erase evidence. The swarm might be not an invasion, but a return. He felt a tremor in the floor. At first, he thought it was imagination. Then dust sifted from the vaulted ribs. A distant thump echoed upward, like a heartbeat amplified by stone. His lamp flickered. He shut down the console and stepped back, heart racing. The vault was waking. He turned toward the stairwell, but paused. On a plinth beside the cylinders lay a small data crystal etched with the Ophidian seal. He picked it up, feeling its cold weight. It might hold the complete records, enough to damn entire sectors. Or it might hold a lure designed to mark him for death. Yet his hands closed around it. Some truths, once glimpsed, could not be left behind. The thumping grew louder. Fluid inside the cylinders trembled. A spined limb brushed the glass, slow and searching. Carl backed toward the stairwell. He imagined Serac waiting above with a kill team, the rival's face calm as he accused Kale of heresy. But if Serac already controlled the vault, why leave it untouched? Perhaps no one controlled it. Perhaps it was controlling them all, across centuries, through dreams and genes. He ascended quickly, boots ringing on stone. Behind him, a cylinder cracked with a sharp report. Warm air gusted up the stairwell, carrying a chittering whisper. His augmetic ear translated it as nothing, yet his human nerves felt meaning. Hunger knows its source. At the fissure, he keyed the code to seal the entrance. Ice slid back over stone, hiding the stairwell once more. He stumbled to the skiff, clutching the data crystal. His suit smelled of the vault's air, metal, blood, and something older than both. He strapped in, powered the engine, and lifted off. Zara's wake shrank beneath him. A grey sphere wrapped in aurora like a serpent eating its tail. He set a course for the nearest relay station, but his fingers hesitated over the transmission runes. Who could he trust? The High Lords, Serac, the Imperium itself. His silence had protected him once. Now it threatened to doom them all. Through the view slit, he saw the stars again. For a moment they seemed to shift, aligning into a pattern like open jaws. He blinked and the pattern dissolved, leaving only the patient dark. But he felt it watching him, coiling closer, as if the swarm's origin were not in the vault, but in the decision he would make next. Warp space was a black ocean without horizon, yet Kyle felt as though he sailed a narrow channel, whose walls pressed invisibly against his mind. The skiff's Gellerfield groaned under unseen currents, its generators chanting binary prayers like monks clutching beads. Outside, colours without names folded and unfolded. Sometimes he glimpsed a shape like a wing, sometimes the suggestion of a mouth stretching wider than a planet. He had crossed the warp countless times before, but now every fluctuation felt personal, as if the void itself were measuring him for assimilation. The data crystal lay in a padded compartment near his feet, pulsing faintly, its glow timed to the rhythm of his pulse, or perhaps the hunger's. He no longer tried to tell the difference. He had plotted a course toward the segmentum relay at Karen's reach, hoping to find a secure astropath who still valued truth over survival. Yet, as the skiff drifted deeper, the warp tides shifted, carrying him off the plotted path, like a riptide dragging a swimmer. His instruments displayed coordinates that changed faster than he could recite the litany of recalibration. He closed his augmetic eyes and whispered the old dialect his mother had taught him, the one the Mechanicus had tried to scrub from his tongue. The syllables felt like hooks thrown into the dark, anchoring him to a memory of being human. Hours, or the warp's imitation of hours, passed before a voice crackled through the vox. It was not a transmission, but a sound like teeth on glass. Words emerged, distorted but unmistakable. Ver Kale, you carry what was never meant to return. He froze. The voice resembled Serac's, but older, as if stretched across centuries. He reached for the vox controls, but static erupted, filling the cabin with a shriek that made his augmetic shudder. Then silence returned, heavier than before. He realized with a sick certainty that the warp was not random tonight. It was guiding him somewhere, perhaps Karen's reach, perhaps the mouth of some greater trap. The crystal's glow intensified, casting serpentine shadows on the walls. He considered jettisoning it into the warp, letting hunger reclaim its seed, but his fingers would not release it. Knowledge had already dug its claws into him. Even destruction felt like a kind of betrayal. When the skiff finally tore back into real space, Cal gasped as though surfacing from deep water. Before him hung not the relay station, but a derelict void fortress orbiting a dead star. Its hull was cracked open like a carcass, exposing decks lined with frost and bone. Ancient sigils of the Mechanicus and the Inquisition overlapped on its flanks, their paint long flaked away. He scanned for power signatures and found a single faint pulse deep inside, like a heartbeat in a corpse. His fuel reserves were low. Continuing to Karen's reach without refueling risked drifting helplessly into the interstellar dark. Yet docking here felt like stepping into a trap woven from his own past. Still, the hunger behind him felt closer with each breath. He aligned the skiff and initiated docking. Magnetic clamps groaned. The airlock cycled with a hiss like a sigh. Inside, the fortress smelled of oil gone sour and prayers gone stale. Lumen strips flickered fitfully, casting moving shadows that resembled claws. He moved through corridors lined with shrines to dead saints of knowledge, bronze visages with augmetic eyes, their mouths sealed by rivets. Each alcove bore a plaque naming a project: Gene Adaptive Protocols, Void Survival Initiative, Ophidian Phase 3. He realized this place was a mausoleum for forbidden research, perhaps an ark meant to drift unseen until needed. In the central chamber, he found the source of the pulse, a dying navigator suspended in a stasis cradle. Her third eye was closed but twitching beneath translucent skin. Tubes fed her a viscous fluid that smelled faintly of the vault's air. When Kyle approached, her lips moved. He bent close and heard a whisper. Ocean between galaxies, tide returning. Her voice cracked into a sob. They sent them away and called it exile. Now they come home. Kyle's throat tightened. Who sent them? He asked. The navigator's blind eyes rolled upward. We did, all of us. Too proud to burn the seed, too afraid to claim it. They learned hunger from us. She convulsed, then fell still. Her third eye opened briefly, showing not a pupil, but a swirl of stars being devoured. Then it dulled and closed forever. He stood shaking beside the cradle. The words confirmed what the vault had only implied. The Tyranids were not an alien accident, but a consequence, perhaps even a weapon exiled beyond the rim to hide humanity's sin. The Imperium had cast them into the dark like unwanted offspring, expecting the void to erase them. Instead, they had learned, adapted, multiplied, and now returned as a devouring tide. A low hum rose from the deck. He glanced at his data slate. An incoming transmission blinked. Serac's sigil. Against his better judgment, he accepted. The rival's face appeared as a grainy hollow, features gaunt, eyes like cold knives. Magos Kael, Serac said softly. You have gone where you should not. The Ophidian seal was not meant for you. You sent it, Kael replied. Or you let it slip. Why? Serac tilted his head. Because truth is heavier than any sanction. Someone must carry it, and someone must be destroyed by it. You chose that path the moment you looked into the void. I didn't choose this, Kyle whispered. Then you are already part of the swarm. The hollow flickered, showing Serac surrounded by robed figures, perhaps a conclave. Return the crystal. Seal the vault. The Imperium will face the Tyranids as an external threat. That narrative will hold. If you break it, you break us all. Kyle's hands trembled. We created them. We owe the galaxy the truth. Serac's expression did not change. We owe survival, nothing else. The transmission cut. Kyle stared at the dead hollow. Around him, the fortress groaned as if in sympathy. Somewhere deeper, metal scraped on metal. He heard a faint clicking, like mandibles testing air. He turned and saw movement at the far end of the corridor, shadows pooling, then rising into shapes that should not exist inside a human-built station. Small, sinuous, pale as the creatures in the vault, their eyes like drops of obsidian. He ran back to the skiff, the data crystal clutched to his chest. The clicking followed, faster now, echoing from the walls. He sealed the hatch and fired the engines, tearing away from the fortress just as a section of its hull buckled outward, revealing a nest of chitin and spines. Tiny figures writhed in vacuum, unfazed, reaching after him until distance swallowed them. Stars wheeled around the skiff as he accelerated toward Karen's reach. His fuel gauge blinked red. His heart matched the warning light. The navigator's words repeated in his mind. Ocean between galaxies, tide returning. He realized that what he had seen on the fortress was not an isolated infestation, but a harbinger. The swarm was already within the Imperium's forgotten corners, incubating in its sins, waiting for a signal. He looked at the crystal, its glow steady, patient, serpentine. For the first time, he felt not only fear, but a grim understanding. He was no longer an observer cataloguing distant phenomena. He was part of a living narrative older than his empire, a chapter written in hunger and secrecy. And somewhere beyond the halo stars, the ocean's tide was turning home. The relay towers of Charon's Reach loomed like blackened spires above a dying world, their silhouette a crown of thorns against a sun the colour of old brass. Cal's skiff rattled as it descended through thin, toxic clouds, the engines coughing like an asthmatic beast. Beneath him stretched a landscape of cracked salt flats and shattered hab rings, once a thriving station world for trade between sectors, now little more than an ossuary of promises. Vox beacons whispered half-words in a dozen dialects, like ghosts rehearsing confessions. The pulse he had felt since Zara's wake throbbed stronger here, synchronizing with the skiff's every shudder, as if the planet itself breathed in time with the hunger. He landed on a scorched landing pad, pitted with impact craters. His boots struck ash that clung like grey snow to his red robes. In the distance, astropathic towers spiraled upward, each crowned with a choir dome of shattered crystal. Once those domes had carried voices across light years. Now they stood mute, their arches open to the poisoned sky. Cal drew his robes tight and began the long walk toward the main spire, clutching the data crystal beneath his cloak. He rehearsed what he would say to the astropaths, how to speak truth without igniting suspicion, how to request transmission without revealing too much. Every scenario ended with the same image. Inquisitor Serac's calm eyes as a bolt shell ended him. Halfway across the flats, he sensed movement. A column of pilgrims approached from the ruins, their faces hidden under rag-bound hoods, their steps synchronized like a single creature walking in many bodies. They carried reliquaries of twisted metal, chanting in a cadence that rose and fell like the tide. Kyle stepped aside, head bowed. As they passed, a child among them turned its face toward him. The hood slipped just enough to reveal eyes black and depthless, not reflecting light but swallowing it. The chant faltered for a heartbeat, then resumed. When Kale looked again, the child had turned away, indistinguishable among the column. He quickened his pace. The main spire's gates hung ajar, their sigils scoured away by sandstorms. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of incense and decay. Rows of astropaths knelt on marble cracked into a spiderweb of fissures. Their sockets were bandaged, their mouths sewn with silver wire, a ritual of silence he had never seen. In the center of the chamber rose the choir throne, a vast mechanism of brass and bone, where a single astropath sat strapped, head thrown back, lips moving without sound. Kyle approached, heart hammering. He had expected ruin, but not this liturgy of muteness. He placed his palm on the throne's console. Runes flickered weakly, asking for credentials. He fed in his Magos codes. The throne resisted, then accepted, a sigh of released wards. The astropath's eyes snapped open under scarred lids. They were milky, but aware. "You carry the serpent's echo," the astropath rasped, voice like paper tearing. "It burns in the warp. We all feel it." "I need to transmit," Kyle said quickly. "Data only, priority cipher. The Imperium must know what is coming." The astropath's head tilted. Must they? Or must they remain blind so hope survives a little longer? Carl's patience frayed. "Worlds will burn. They are already burning. You know what the signal means." A tremor shook the spire. Dust drifted from the dome. Somewhere deep below, machinery groaned, like a leviathan shifting in sleep. The astropath's lips twitched. "The hunger was born here," they whispered. Not in this spire, but in the silence between words. Every message the Imperium refused to hear, every truth it sealed away, fed it. You are only the latest messenger devoured. Kyle leaned close. Then help me. Let at least one warning escape before it is too late. For a moment, he thought he saw pity in the blind eyes. The astropath extended a trembling hand. Give me the crystal. Kyle hesitated. The memory of the child's black eyes flickered in his mind. Was this astropath still human, or already a conduit of the swarm? But refusal meant failure. He placed the crystal in the waiting palm. The astropath pressed it to their brow. A low hum filled the chamber. Runes flared on the throne, then cascaded into patterns Kyle did not recognize. Serpentine coils of light wrapping the brass pillars. The astropath gasped. So much, they whispered. So old. Their voice rose into a cry that echoed off the dome. It is not only a return, it is a memory of flesh seeking its parent. Cal reached for the crystal, but the astropath clutched it tight, eyes rolling back. Threads of warp light spilled from their mouth like smoke. The throne's mechanisms jerked, cables snapping like tendons. A psychic shockwave burst outward. Cal staggered, augmetic sparking. He heard a chorus, not one voice but many, chanting inside his skull, choir of hunger, choir of hunger. The astropath convulsed, then went still. The crystal rolled from their hand, glowing brighter than before. Carl snatched it up, fingers burning. The runes on the console went dark. Around him, the kneeling astropaths began to sway, silver wires snapping from their mouths as they murmured in unison. Their blind faces turned toward him, lips curling into faint smiles. He backed away, heart pounding. The chamber's air thickened, tasting of iron and salt. He felt the hunger inside him resonate with the voices, a vibration deeper than bone. Somewhere above, the sun dimmed behind clouds. The spire trembled again, harder, as if something beneath the flats had stirred. Kyle fled into the corridor, clutching the crystal to his chest. Behind him, the astropath's murmurs rose into a chant that matched the pilgrims outside. Through shattered windows, he saw the column of hoods kneeling in the ash, arms raised toward the spire. Their reliquaries opened like seed pods, releasing clouds of black spores that drifted upward, coalescing into shapes like wings. He ran to the landing pad. The skiff waited, engines idling weakly. As he climbed aboard, he glimpsed movement in the salt flats. Figures emerging from fissures, pale and sinuous, their bodies neither fully human nor fully alien. Some still wore remnants of pilgrim robes. Others bore chitinous plates like newborn carapace. They did not chase him, but swayed as one, as if blessing his departure. The skiff lifted, ash swirling in its wake. Through the view slit, Cal saw the spire's dome crack open like an egg. A column of psychic light speared skyward, carrying the chant into the void. He realized the transmission had already occurred, not as a message, but as an awakening. Whatever lay between galaxies had heard. He set a course away from Karen's reach, though his nav map showed only interference. The warp shimmered at the edges of real space like water around a drain. He felt dizzy, as though his thoughts were not entirely his own. Images flickered behind his eyes. Chitin forests, oceans of teeth, stars falling like embers into a waiting maw. In the cockpit's reflection, he barely recognized himself. His augmetic eyes glowed faintly, pupils narrowing to slits. He blinked, and they returned to normal, but the afterimage lingered. He whispered a prayer, but the words came out different, curling into a dialect he did not know yet understood. The hunger was not only approaching, It was already singing through him. He stared at the crystal. Its glow had softened, but now faint tendrils of light reached from it to his palm, tracing veins like living filaments. He thought of Serac's warning, of the navigator's confession, of the child's black eyes. He realized the question was no longer whether the Imperium would face the Tyranids as an external threat. The question was how long before its own flesh recognized the hymn and joined. Outside the skiff, stars stretched into lines as the warp opened like a mouth. Kale felt the pull, but did not resist. The tide was rising, and he was already adrift. The warp enveloped Kale's skiff like a living fog, its currents no longer random, but rhythmic, each surge matching the pulse of the crystal in his hand. He floated in a corridor of shifting light, colors bleeding into one another like oil on black water. Where once he had felt fear of the warp's unpredictability, now he sensed a structure beneath it, a vast pattern he could almost read. Every flicker whispered of a destination, every echo of a purpose. He wondered if this was what the earliest navigators had glimpsed before madness took them. Not chaos, but an order too alien to endure. His nav console displayed no coordinates, only serpentine symbols twisting across the screen. He traced one with a gloved finger and felt a jolt of recognition. Not memory, but something deeper, as if the symbol had been carved into his genome long before his birth. He whispered the litany of rejection to banish the thought, but the words came out warped, curling into the same dialect he had spoken without learning at Curran's reach. The sound tasted like salt and ash. Then the skiff lurched, and real space unfolded around him. He found himself above a world unmarked on any chart, a gas giant with pale storm bands circling a core of deep violet. Its orbit held a single structure, a cathedral ship adrift on solar winds, its hull formed of black stone veined with brass, spires rising like claws around a central dome. The Ophidian seal glimmered faintly on its prow. He knew this place from the hushed fragments of his father's stories. Project Ophidian's Heart, the cathedral ship Ophidian's Mercy, rumoured destroyed during a purge centuries ago. Fuel nearly gone, Cal guided the skiff to a docking cradle carved into the hull. As he approached, runes lit one by one, acknowledging him not as intruder, but as expected guest. The cradle sealed behind him with a hiss. For a moment he sat in the cockpit, hands trembling on the controls, aware of how far he had strayed from every sanctioned path. Then he took the crystal and stepped into the ship. Inside was a nave of shadow and gold. Pillars carved with entwined human and alien forms reached toward a vaulted ceiling in which stained glass panels depicted serpents devouring suns. Candles still burned along the aisles, though no crew moved among them. The air smelled of incense mixed with the faint tang of organic fluids. He moved slowly, his footfalls echoing like prayers. Each echo seemed answered by a faint chittering just beyond hearing. At the far end stood an altar of black marble. Upon it lay a series of small sealed vials, each labelled in a language older than High Gothic. Above the altar hung a banner depicting a human figure haloed not by light, but by a ring of fanged maws. Kyle's augmetics tried to translate the inscription and returned only a single word. Return. A voice drifted from the shadows behind the altar. You carry the echo of our first sin. Kyle spun, hand on the short pistol hidden beneath his robes. A figure stepped into the candlelight. A woman in Mechanicus crimson, her face bare of augmetics, eyes black and depthless. Yet her bearing was unmistakably human, and her voice carried the weight of command. Who are you? Kyle asked. I am what remains of Ophidion's mercy, she replied. Magos biologis lyrae. Once architect of adaptation, now caretaker of what we could not destroy. Cal's heart thudded. This ship was purged centuries ago. Lyrae smiled faintly. We purged records, not ourselves. Some of us chose exile rather than burn our work. We drifted beyond the rim, tending the seed we cast away. We thought distance would contain it. We were wrong. She approached the altar and gestured to the vials. Here lie fragments of the original stock, not Tyranids as you know them, but their embryonic concept. Humanity's attempt to create life that could endure the void without warp taint, feed on anything, survive everything. We called it the Ophidian strain. It learned too well. Kyle stared at the vials, remembering the writhing shapes in the vault on Zara's wake. You didn't destroy it. We couldn't. Lyrae's voice cracked. Every cell remembered its design. Even ash can sprout teeth if scattered far enough. Kyle felt the crystal grow warmer in his palm. Then why summon me? Because the tide has turned. The children we cast into the dark have come home. They will devour their parent, and the Imperium will call it invasion. But invasion is only return. She studied him with those black eyes. You are not just a messenger, Magos. You are an heir. The serpent's echo sings in your bloodline. Kyle recoiled. Lies. Not lies. Legacy. She reached toward him, fingers pale and slender. Your father was one of us. We seeded our genes among distant populations, hoping one day a conscience might rise with the knowledge. You are that conscience. His pulse roared in his ears. Memories flickered. His father's whispered catechism, his own dreams of alien tissue under glass, the symbols on the console aligning with his instincts. All threads converged into a single terrible tapestry. Lyrae's voice softened. You have a choice. You can transmit the truth and ignite panic, accelerating the Imperium's collapse. Or you can help us guide the return, shape the swarm's hunger into something survivable. It will mean sacrifice, perhaps your humanity, but it may spare 1,000,000 worlds. Kyle stared at the altar, at the vials that gleamed like captured stars. You want me to join you, he said. I want you to finish what we began. A tremor passed through the ship, candles flickering. Lyrae's eyes widened. They are near. Who? The choir, she whispered. The first brood to find us. A deep thud reverberated through the hull, followed by a rising hiss like breath through countless throats. Kyle's augmetics picked up movement outside. Shapes clinging to the hull, larger than dropships, limbs folding and unfolding like knives. The Tyranids had arrived, drawn by the signal from Karen's reach. Lyrae moved quickly, pressing a rune on the altar. A section of the floor slid open, revealing a shaft lined with organic tendrils that pulsed faintly. This is the heart of the ship, she said. Our last attempt to speak with them. Not words, but resonance. You can help me finish the signal, or you can run. Kyle looked toward the docking cradle where his skiff waited, fuel nearly gone, but still an escape. He looked back at Lyrae, at the tendril-lined shaft descending into a glow like deep ocean water. The crystal in his palm throbbed, tendrils of light brushing his veins. Another impact shook the ship. Distant screeches echoed through the corridors, metal tearing under claws. Lyrae's face remained calm but pale. Choose, she said. Every moment we wait, another mind joins the choir. Soon it will drown us both. Kyle's throat was dry. He imagined the Imperium's banners burning, Serac's cold eyes, the child on Karen's reach staring with black pupils. He imagined the swarm not as an enemy, but as a lost child returning to a parent that had abandoned it. He stepped toward the shaft. "Show me the heart," he said. Liray's expression flickered with relief and sorrow. "Then come." Together they descended into the glow, leaving the nave of shadows behind. Above them, the Tyranids clung to the hull, their mandibles opening in unison, a silent hymn of hunger vibrating through metal and flesh alike. The ship shuddered, candles guttering out, yet the glow below burned brighter, as if a sun were rising inside the serpent's coil. Carl felt the resonance reach into him deeper than bone, rewriting fear into something else. Not courage exactly, but acceptance. As the shaft closed above them, cutting off the nave and the skiff and the last visible link to his old life, Cal realized he was no longer fleeing a secret. He was walking into its heart. The shaft ended in a chamber unlike any Cal had ever seen, a hollow sphere suspended within the cathedral ship's heart. Its walls were neither metal nor stone, but a living lattice of pale tissue interlaced with cables, pulsing faintly as though the ship itself were breathing. The air shimmered with a low vibration felt more in bone than ear, a rhythm like a heartbeat multiplied 1,000-fold. Dim lights drifted within the sphere like plankton in a dark ocean, casting ghost-green reflections on Cale's augmetic hands. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. This was no laboratory, no chapel of machines. It was a womb designed to cradle a sin. Lyrae stepped ahead of him, her crimson robes brushing the living floor. "This is the resonance core," she said softly. "Here we tried to teach the Ophidian strain a different song. Not hunger, but harmony. We failed." Carl's eyes traced the lattice. "You failed, yet it lives." "It endures because the song never ended," Lyrae replied. "Every echo we sent drifted into the void, fragments of a lullaby without words. They built their own choir from our notes." She turned to face him. "That crystal you carry contains the last verse we wrote, but never dared to release." Kyle tightened his grip on the crystal. Its glow had softened since their descent, but thin filaments now extended from it to his palm, curling like affectionate vines. "And if I release it?" Lyrae's black eyes glimmered. "It may bind them, or it may summon them completely. We designed it as both leash and beacon." Another tremor shook the chamber. Above, muffled screeches rolled through the ship's hull, claws raking against spires. Kyle pictured the Tyranids clinging to the cathedral's skin, feeling the vibration of their creators' voices inside. "They're already here," he said. "They are listening." Lyrae stepped closer, placing her hand over his. "We do not have time for certainty, only choice." Cal's pulse hammered. He remembered the astropath's scream, the child's black eyes, Serac's cold warning. He thought of himself at the watch station, filing silence after silence, thinking obedience was safety. Now every silence converged here, demanding a sound. "If I release the verse," he whispered, "I become the signal." "You already are," Lyrae said. A panel opened in the lattice, revealing a dais grown from the living floor. At its center rose a slender pillar of bone, capped with a crystalline interface. "Place it here," she instructed. "The core will translate the verse into resonance. You must stand within the field as it transmits." Kyle hesitated. "What will it do to me?" Lyrae's expression flickered with something like sorrow. "It will show you what we were, and what we made. It may break you, or it may change you. Either way, you will no longer be only Verkel." The ship shuddered again, stronger this time. A crack opened in the lattice above, spilling dust that smelled of salt. Beyond it, Kyle glimpsed a clawed limb sliding through, slick and glistening. He stepped to the dais, hands trembling, and placed the crystal on the pillar. At once, the chamber brightened. Filaments of light shot from the crystal into the lattice, running along its veins like quicksilver. The low vibrations swelled into a deep hum that pressed against Carl's chest. He felt the ship awaken under his feet, each pulse echoing through his bones. Images flooded his mind, snapshots of laboratories lit by forbidden suns, children born with scaled skin, spore creatures drifting through void reefs like seeds on wind. He saw humanity's hubris coiled around every act, fear disguised as progress, secrecy masquerading as safety. He cried out, but the hum swallowed his voice. Lire's hand gripped his shoulder, steadying him. "Breathe," she murmured. "Let it pass through you." Then the images shifted. He was no longer seeing memories, but sensations. Movement across intergalactic dark, the taste of iron suns, the press of countless minds beating as one. He felt hunger, not as emptiness, but as direction, an endless reaching toward the warmth that had cast him out. For a heartbeat, he was the swarm, and the swarm was a child knocking at a locked door. Tears blurred his augmetic eyes. "They're not only predators," he gasped. "No," Lire said. "They are a question we refuse to answer." The hum reached a crescendo. Above, the Tyranids shrieked, a chorus answered by the core's vibration. The claw withdrew from the crack. Silence fell, a held breath. Cal felt the resonance settle inside him, not as invasion, but as recognition, like two halves of a broken code aligning. The crystal's filaments retracted from his palm, leaving faint, luminous veins under his skin. He stepped back from the pillar, trembling. "What have we done?" Lire's gaze was unreadable. "We have given them a name again." A low thrumming began outside the hull, slower, more measured. Through a slit in the lattice, Kyle glimpsed the swarm peeling away from the ship, drifting into formation around it. Bioships turned their maws outward, not inward. The cathedral ship ceased shuddering. In the silence, Kale realized the Tyranids were no longer clawing but circling, waiting. "They're holding," he whispered. "For now," Lire said. "The verse is incomplete without a voice to anchor it. They will follow the resonance you carry until it fades. Then hunger will reclaim them." Kyle felt the weight of the revelation press against his ribs. "You're saying I'm the anchor?" "Yes. You can guide them away, perhaps even teach them a different path. But you cannot do it from here. You must go where they go." He stared at her. "You're asking me to leave the Imperium, to go with the swarm." "I'm asking you to choose what kind of sin will outlive you," she replied quietly. Another image flashed in his mind. Serac's face, the High Lord's marble chambers, banners of gold fluttering above worlds that believed themselves protected. He imagined those worlds swallowed one by one, never knowing why. Then he imagined himself within the swarm, a single conscience trying to steer an ocean with a whisper. Both visions felt like drowning. He looked at Lire. "Come with me." Her faint smile held no hope. "I am already part of the core. My body ends here. My voice ends with you." The hum deepened again, this time softer, almost a lullaby. The swarm outside shifted, bioships opening their wings like petals, revealing veins of faint green light. Kyle felt a pull inside his chest, gentle but insistent. It was not hunger, but invitation. He walked to the edge of the dais, feeling the lattice pulse under his boots. "If I go," he said, "I might become what they are." "If you stay," Lire said, "you will remain what made them." Kale closed his eyes. He remembered his father's whispered prayer, the taste of iron and ash, the first heartbeat on the Auspex. He thought of the child on Karen's reach, of the astropath's blind eyes, of stars flickering like teeth behind a veil. All of it converged here, a single note waiting to be sung. He opened his eyes and stepped from the dais. "Show me the path to their fleet." Lyra bowed her head. "Then the resonance will guide you." A section of the lattice dissolved, revealing a tunnel lined with glowing tendrils leading downward toward a waiting biopod grown from the ship's flesh. Kyle approached it, the pull inside him matching its pulse. He glanced back once. Lyra stood by the pillar, her face illuminated by the fading crystal, a statue of regret. "Tell Serac," Kyle said, though he knew she could not. "I already have," she murmured. "He will come. Perhaps he will try to stop you. Perhaps he will understand." The biopod opened like a seed. Kyle stepped inside. Tendrils wrapped around his arms, not restraining but steadying. The walls closed, sealing him in a dim green glow. He felt the hum rise around him, through him, a tide lifting a lone swimmer. Above, the cathedral ship trembled one last time as the swarm began to move, a vast, slow turn toward the dark between stars. Kyle's pod detached, drawn into the living current. He no longer felt the boundary between ship and creature, between himself and the ocean of minds waiting beyond. Only the rhythm remained, ancient and patient, a song begun long before his birth now resuming through his breath. He did not know if he was guiding the swarm or the swarm was guiding him. He only knew he had chosen to enter the tide. The pod moved without engines, carried as if by the breath of some enormous creature. Its walls glowed faintly, translucent enough for Kyle to see the cathedral ship shrinking behind him, a black spire adrift in a galaxy of frost-blue stars. Around it the swarm turned, bioships shifting like a school of leviathans, their immense forms gliding in perfect silence. They did not jostle or compete. They drifted as one body, each vessel a limb of a larger mind. Kyle's pod slid among them like a bead caught in the living tide. He expected panic, but what filled him was a slow, inexorable pull, a sense of being drawn toward the heart of a truth he had spent his life circling. Inside the pod, the tendrils holding him flexed gently, matching the rhythm of his pulse. The air smelled faintly of salt and ozone, not unpleasant but startlingly familiar. The scent of the vault, of Karen's reach, of the cathedral's core. His augmetic eyes adjusted to the dim green glow. Symbols flickered across the inner surface of the pod, curling like runes in a language half remembered. He did not read them so much as feel them, each shape resonating with a nerve or a memory. Through the pod's membrane he glimpsed the nearest bioship, a colossal organism shaped like a mantis's claw fused with a cathedral's hull. Its carapace was streaked with scars, some fresh, some older than human empires. Vast sensory fronds unfurled from its prow, tasting the void. As it passed, Cal felt a brush against his mind, not words, but a pressure, like a door opening onto a room filled with whispers. He gasped, and the tendrils steadied him, a mother's hand on a child's shoulder. A low hum began inside his skull. He thought at first it was the pod's machinery, but it pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Images spilled behind his eyes, flashes of the swarm crossing the intergalactic gulf, sleeping between galaxies like a tide held in check by cold and distance. The first taste of this galaxy's suns, the scent of the Imperium's psychic beacon drawing them inward. Beneath it all, a memory older than stars. A small spore creature released from a laboratory vault, tumbling into darkness, dividing, learning, remembering. Kyle clutched his chest. "You remember me," he whispered. You remember us? The hum deepened, and he felt a reply that was not quite affirmation, but recognition, a sense of turning toward a familiar warmth. For a heartbeat, he glimpsed himself from outside, a red-robed figure inside a glowing pod, a spark floating in a sea of living night. The image filled him with a grief so vast it felt like falling. He closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing. Serac's warning echoed in his memory. Return the crystal, seal the vault. The Imperium will face the Tyranids as an external threat. That narrative will hold. But Kyle was no longer sure there was an external threat. He felt less like a captive among predators than an errant cell returning to its organism. Perhaps the Imperium itself was the anomaly, a wound in the swarm's memory. The pod tilted, aligning with a larger vessel shaped like a crescent jaw, an opening irised wide, revealing a chamber lit by bioluminescent veins. The pod slid inside and came to rest on a fleshy platform. The tendrils released him, retracting with a hiss. For a moment, he sat still, heart racing, before stepping onto the living floor. It pulsed gently under his boots, sending vibrations up his legs like a distant heartbeat. The chamber was vast, its ceiling a dome of translucent tissue through which stars glimmered. In its center rose a mound of coiling tendrils wrapped around a pulsing node the size of a dropship. As Kyle approached, the node unfurled, revealing a cavity lined with membranes like the inside of a lung. Warm air flowed out, carrying a scent of iron and brine. He heard a voice, not with his ears, but inside his skull. You are the echo. He staggered. Who speaks? We do, the choir you named Hunger. Kyle's mouth went dry. Why bring me here? To remember, to choose. Images filled his mind again, this time sharper, almost tactile. A laboratory's first spore splitting under starlight. Scientists whispering over forbidden data. A council voting to exile the prototypes beyond the galactic rim. He saw faces, some human, some augmented, some he recognized from old archives. Among them was his father, younger, eyes bright with conviction. In his hands he held a vial marked with the Ophidian seal. Cal fell to his knees. We did this to you, he whispered. We cast you out. The voice coiled through him. You are us. We are you. Hunger remembers parent and path. He lifted his head. And now we return. The beacon of your Imperium calls. But you hold the verse. You may guide the tide or let it break upon the shore. Kyle's hands trembled. The crystal still rested in his palm, its glow subdued but steady. If I guide you, what becomes of me? Anchor, mouth, bridge. He almost laughed, a hollow sound swallowed by the chamber, a bridge between devourer and devoured. The choir pulsed once more. Choice. He thought of Lyrae in the cathedral ship, bound to the core, her voice ending with him. He thought of Serac, cold eyes watching the Imperium crumble behind its walls of secrecy. He thought of the child on Charon's reach, the black eyes swallowing light, the pilgrims releasing spores like prayers, each image braided into a single thread, leading to this moment. He rose slowly. If I take this path, will you spare them? Silence. Then, spare is not hunger's word, but shape, guide, slow, become lullaby. Kyle's throat ached, a million worlds behind him, unaware of the tide rising beyond their stars. If he refused, the swarm would come as pure instinct, devouring all. If he accepted, he might temper it, but at the cost of himself, perhaps even his mind. The Imperium would call him heretic, monster, traitor. He might never see a human face again. He closed his eyes. In the darkness, he felt the choir's pulse merge with his own, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat long awaited. He whispered the prayer his mother had taught him, but now the syllables shifted, blending with the choir's resonance. The dialect felt natural, inevitable. When he opened his eyes, the chamber glowed brighter. The tendrils around the node parted, revealing a pathway lined with living lights. "Step," the voice whispered. "Anchor." Kale took a breath that tasted of iron and salt. "Then I step." He walked into the cavity. Membranes closed around him, warm and pulsing. Tendrils wrapped his arms and chest, not in restraint, but in enfolding, a cocoon of living sound. The crystal dissolved in his palm, its filaments threading into his veins. He gasped as the resonance surged through him, 1,000 minds brushing his own, each carrying a fragment of the lost lullaby. For a heartbeat, he felt himself dissolve. Boundaries of skin, thought and history melting into a single tide. Yet within it, a small, clear space remained, a human voice whispering, "Guide." He clung to that space as the chamber sealed, the last glimmer of starlight fading beyond the membrane. Around him, the bioship thrummed, a heart preparing to beat anew. The swarm shifted course, its vast bodies angling toward the deep void between galaxies, away from the Imperium's beacon. For now. Kale's consciousness hovered between selves. Magos Ver Kale, dutiful servant of a crumbling empire, and something larger. A chord struck in an ocean of living notes. He did not know how long he could hold that chord, only that it existed because he chose it. In the distance of his mind, he felt Serac stirring, a shadow moving across the warp, a rival whose path would soon intersect his again. But for this moment, inside the heart of the swarm, Kale was more than observer, less than predator, and entirely alone. Kale drifted in a twilight that was neither waking nor dream. The living chamber around him pulsed in slow tidal motions, its walls glowing with faint bioluminescence that rose and fell like the breath of a sleeping colossus. Tendrils cradled him upright, feeding him air that smelled faintly of brine and burnt metal. Inside his skull, the choir murmured, a ceaseless tide of impressions without words, tastes of distant suns, the echo of 1,000,000,000 wings, the ache of a hunger older than stars. He was no longer simply hearing them. They brushed against his memories, sifting them like grains through a net. He tried to summon his name aloud. "Ver Kyle," he whispered, voice hoarse. The tendrils quivered, and a low hum answered him. For a heartbeat, he glimpsed an image, himself as a child on a rust-red moon, holding his father's data slate, tracing the serpentine seal. The memory dissolved into an image of a larval spore splitting under black light. The swarm did not speak in words, but in parallels. A shudder rolled through the vessel. Through the translucent membrane above him, he saw the stars turning, the entire fleet adjusting its vector. The bioship's sensory fronds unfurled and dipped like antennae, tasting a new current. Kyle felt the pull of 2 directions inside his chest, the Imperium's psychic beacon calling from one vector, the deep intergalactic void from another. The choir pressed both against his mind, waiting for his intent to tip the scale. He reached for the crystal instinctively, but it had long since dissolved into him. Under his skin, faint threads of light glowed, pulsing with the same rhythm as the chamber. When he touched his forearm, he felt warmth and vibration, as if a small organism coiled beneath the flesh. The sight sickened him, yet some part of him also felt a strange, guilty relief. No more artifacts to lose or betray him. The verse lived inside him now. Another tremor coursed through the ship, this one sharper. Kyle's augmetic eyes flickered as if struck by static. He saw a flash of Serac's face in his mind, lips moving in silence. Then an image of an inquisitorial war barge slicing through warp currents, prow lit with holy fire. He understood. Serac was coming. The rival had not given up. He was tracking the resonance like a predator following blood in water. The choir felt his realization. A ripple of unease ran through the bioship, its pulse quickening. Cal tasted an emotion that was not quite fear, but anticipation. The swarm was not used to being pursued. It had always been the hunter. Now a fragment of the Imperium's will pierced its ocean, and Carl stood at the center of the breach. He steadied his breathing and tried to shape a thought, directing it outward. "Hold course," he whispered in his mind. The choir responded with a soft thrum, like a vast animal lowering its head. The fleet's vector stabilized, yet Carl sensed how tenuous the connection was. He was an anchor, but not yet a rudder. A membrane parted ahead of him, revealing a corridor lined with living veins. He understood it as an invitation. He stepped from the cradle, boots sinking into a floor that pulsed like muscle. The corridor sloped upward toward a chamber where the choir's presence felt stronger, denser, like approaching the eye of a storm. As he walked, images brushed against him. Glimpses of worlds the swarm had passed in silence. Oceans of microbial life sampled and forgotten. Dead suns cracked open for their marrow. The scale of it numbed him. How could any mind, even 1,000,000 minds together, hold such memories? And yet it did, and now those memories touched him. The corridor opened into a dome vast as a city square. Its walls were studded with nodules that glowed faintly, each one a psychic organ. At the center rose a pool of viscous fluid, black and iridescent, swirling with faint sparks. Kyle knew without being told that this was a synaptic node, a place where the swarm's consciousness thickened like clotting blood. He approached the edge. At once, the murmurs sharpened into something like voices. Not one, but many, overlapping in chords. Anchor, bridge, choose. They pressed against his mind, neither command nor plea, but potential. Images erupted. Serac's war barge breaking into real space near the fleet. Lances of fire stabbing outward. Millions of human lives on the worlds ahead, unaware. The swarm could veer now, slide back into the intergalactic dark, or surge forward to meet its pursuer. Both possibilities pulsed like twin hearts. Carl fell to his knees, clutching his head. "I don't know how," he whispered. "I'm not a leader." The pool surged upward, tendrils of black fluid rising and curling around his arms like smoke. "You are memory," the choir intoned. "Memory steers hunger." He looked into the pool and saw his reflection ripple. First his own face, then his father's, then a chitin-masked visage with black eyes. He saw the Imperium's banners burning, the cathedral ship drifting as a carcass, Serac standing over a pyre of secrets. He saw himself standing beside the swarm, hand raised not in command but in recognition. He forced himself to breathe slowly. The verse inside him pulsed, its rhythm aligning with the node's swirl. He shaped a thought as clearly as he could. Not yet. Away. Hold. The fluid brightened, shifting from black to green. Outside the dome, a deep tremor ran through the fleet. Through the membrane above, Carl glimpsed the bioships turning, their vast bodies angling away from the Imperium's beacon. The vector bent slowly, like a giant beast altering its stride. The choir murmured approval, or something like it. "Anchor holds." Cal sagged, sweat cold on his brow. For now, at least, he had steered them. But he felt how the effort hollowed him, like pouring water from a cracked vessel. Each moment of guidance braided him tighter into the swarm's mind. How long before the human voice inside him dissolved? He rose unsteadily and looked back at the corridor. He imagined Serac's barge dropping from warp behind them, its decks lined with stormtroopers and psychers, each carrying orders to kill or capture. The rival would not stop until he reclaimed or destroyed the verse. In some hidden part of himself, Kyle even longed for Serac's arrival, for the sharp clarity of confrontation to cut through the endless murmuring tide. But that clarity would come at a cost measured in worlds. He returned his gaze to the pool. "Show me where he is," he murmured. The fluid shifted, forming a map of stars, a glowing thread tracing Serac's path through warp currents. Kale saw how near the rival already was, like a blade sliding toward the heart of flesh. A tendril brushed his cheek. When predator meets parent, tide breaks. He swallowed hard. Then I have little time. Outside, the fleet slid deeper into the void, leaving the Imperium's psychic beacon dimmer behind them. Yet Carl felt no relief. The verse inside him thrummed with a growing ache, as if distance only stretched a tether destined to snap. He realized that guiding the swarm away was not an escape, but a reprieve, a breathing space before the inevitable reckoning. He placed his hand on the edge of the pool. "If I must be your anchor," he whispered, "then let me also be your memory." The words felt strange, heavy, but right. The choir pulsed once, a note of assent. For the first time since leaving Arcturus Halo, Carl felt a fragile thread of purpose. It was not victory, not salvation, but a path drawn through darkness. He would hold the tide as long as he could. He would face Serac when the time came. And perhaps, in the space between, he might discover whether hunger could learn a new song. The dome dimmed, its glow softening like embers under ash. The tendrils withdrew from his arms. Kyle stood alone on the living floor, his veins faintly luminous under his skin. Beyond the membrane, the fleet moved like a single vast organism, its course bending away from prey, but not yet toward peace. Inside him, the verse whispered, patient and unsatisfied. The tide had been turned for a moment, but the ocean waited. The fleet drifted through a region of space the Imperium had never charted, a gulf where starlight thinned to pale threads and time itself felt reluctant to move. Kyle stood in a viewing membrane high above the synaptic node, the living floor rising beneath his boots like a slow tide. Beyond, the bioships glided in silence, their immense shadows forming an undulating procession. He had turned them away from the beacon for now, yet he sensed how temporary the reprieve was. Each passing hour, the verse inside him grew heavier, not a burden on his body, but a gravity on his thoughts, pulling him deeper into their song. His veins glimmered faintly under the skin, threads of pale light coiling like phosphorescent worms. When he touched his forearm, he felt not only warmth, but a pulse that was not entirely his. The choir's impressions brushed his mind in idle currents. The texture of void ice on a comet, the echo of prey minds dreaming beneath distant suns, the scent of electromagnetic storms around black holes. It was not knowledge in words, but in appetites. He feared that one day soon he would wake and no longer remember the difference. Yet a sliver of the old Kyle persisted, clinging to thought like a candle in wind. He used that sliver now, trying to project a question into the tide. Where is Serac? The answer rose at once, unbidden. A vision of a war barge forcing its way through warp currents, prow like a blade of gold and iron, engines screaming hymns of sanction. Around it flickered escort vessels bearing the sigils of the Ordo Xenos. The rival was closer than Kale had guessed, cutting the distance like a predator scenting wounded prey. A low shudder passed through the fleet as the image touched him. The nearest bioship flexed its sensory fronds, turning slightly as if sniffing danger. Kyle felt the question ripple back from the choir. Strike or hide? He closed his eyes. To strike would mean revealing the swarm, perhaps provoking the Imperium into a war measured in billions of lives. To hide would mean ceding initiative to Serac, who would twist the truth into another weapon. Either path carried ruin. He left the viewing membrane and descended a corridor lined with living veins. The walls pulsed gently, bioluminescent motes drifting along them like stars. Each step he took left a faint imprint, as though the ship were recording him. He wondered if, after he dissolved, some echo of his footfalls would remain in its flesh, a memory of a human voice trying to steer an ocean. The corridor opened into a chamber he had not entered before. At its center rose a structure shaped like a massive cocoon of translucent tissue. Inside floated a figure, human in outline but altered, its limbs elongated, skin pale and webbed with faint carapace ridges. Its eyes were closed, mouth moving as if murmuring in sleep. Carl approached slowly, recognizing something in the tilt of its head. When he drew close, the eyes opened, black, depthless, yet unmistakably aware. "Father," Carl whispered. The figure's lips curled in a faint smile. "You came," it said, though no sound left its mouth. The words formed directly in Cale's mind. "I wondered if the echo would find you before the Inquisition did." Cale's knees nearly buckled. "What have you become?" "What we all feared and desired," the figure replied. "Bridge and seed. When they exiled the prototypes, I stayed behind in the core to guide them. I thought distance would dull their hunger. Instead, it sharpened them." "You sent the seal," Kyle realized. "Yes. You were the last thread I left among the Mechanicus. I hoped you might choose differently than I did." Cal gripped the edge of the cocoon. "Differently how?" "To steer rather than flee. To carry memory without surrendering self. But each choice costs." Another tremor shook the fleet. Cal saw a flash of Serac's war barge breaking from warp behind them, its prow glowing with psychic wards. He felt the swarm tense like muscle under a blade. The choir pressed against him, waiting for instruction. "Help me," Cal begged. "If I guide them wrong, the Imperium dies. If I guide them right, I lose myself." His father's altered face softened. "That is the choice we all fled. Hunger was never the enemy. Cowardice was. You cannot save the Imperium by lying to it, nor save yourself by hiding from what you are." "I'm not," Cal began, but the words faltered. He looked down at his glowing veins, at the faint ridges forming along his palms. "Serac is near," his father said. "He will bring fire. The swarm will answer instinct with instinct. Only you can turn them aside, not by command but by memory." "How?" "Remember what you loved before hunger," the voice murmured. "Remember a world, a face, a promise. Shape that into a signal. They will follow the shape of your desire, for you are inside them now." The cocoon dimmed, the figure closing its eyes. "Go. I am only an echo now." Carl stumbled from the chamber, heart racing. He climbed toward the synaptic node at the ship's center, where the choir's hum rose to a throbbing storm. Through the membrane, he saw Serac's war barge emerge fully into real space, flanked by escorts. Lances of light flashed outward, striking the nearest bioship's carapace. Acidic blood boiled into vacuum. The swarm shrieked, the sound not in air but in Cale's skull, a tide of fury ready to break. He fell to his knees at the node's edge. Not yet, he whispered. Hold. The choir trembled but did not strike. He pressed his palms to the living floor, forcing himself to breathe slowly. Images rose unbidden. His mother's voice singing a nameless lullaby, the scent of iron and ash on Arctura's halo, the stars flickering like candles. He shaped them into a single thought. Wait. The fleet hesitated. Bioships shifted but did not charge. Serac's barge fired again, another lance scoring a living hull. Cal gasped, sweat beading on his brow. The verse inside him burned like molten metal, its threads tugging at his mind. He felt his edges fraying, self thinning into choir. But the signal held. The swarm did not strike. Through the haze he sensed Serac's mind probing outward, a cold needle of will seeking the verse. Their thoughts brushed for an instant, rival recognizing rival, predator recognizing anchor. Cal glimpsed a flash of the Inquisitor's face, not as enemy but as mirror. Another man carrying a burden of secrecy too long. Then the connection snapped. The war barge ceased fire, drifting parallel to the fleet. Kyle sagged, lungs burning. He had bought a moment, nothing more, but a moment might be enough. He rose slowly, veins glowing brighter under his skin. The choir pressed close, murmuring a question without words. Anchor choose path. Cal stared at the distant war barge. Somewhere on that vessel Serac was deciding too, whether to attack, to retreat, or to attempt to parley. The tide balanced between hunger and memory, between two men whose choices had shaped it. Kyle closed his eyes, whispering the old dialect like a prayer. The sound resonated through the node, a ripple of human voice threading the swarm's song. Outside, the bioships folded their wings inward, a gesture like kneeling. The war barge held fire. For a heartbeat, the void between them felt not like battlefield, but like threshold. Cal opened his eyes. Then come, Serac, he murmured. Come and see what we made. The verse inside him pulsed once more, patient but insistent, like the ocean drawing breath before the next wave. Two fleets faced one another in a corridor of dead starlight. On one side, the Tyranid bioships drifted in vast concentric arcs, their sensory fronds furled, wings folded like cathedral doors at prayer. On the other side, the Ordo Xenos war barge glimmered with wards and lance batteries, flanked by its escorts like iron hounds. Between them lay only silence and the faint glitter of frozen debris. Carl stood at the heart of the swarm's synaptic node, his hands pressed to the living floor, feeling the vibration of 1,000,000 wings held still. He had asked them to wait. They waited. Yet he sensed how thin the thread was, how easily the tide could break. Inside him the verse pulsed like a second heart. His veins glowed faintly, threads of light winding up his arms toward his throat. He closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing. Each exhalation drew more impressions from the choir. The taste of Serac's ship's power core, the rhythm of its crew's heartbeats, the scent of fear rising from human minds across the void. It was intimacy without mercy, knowledge without walls. He wondered how long before it became his only way of knowing. A ripple of thought touched him. Not words, but an image. A blade descending, then a candle snuffed. The choir was showing him possible futures. If Serac fired again, the swarm would respond, and the void would fill with wreckage and screams. The Imperium would call it an ambush. The truth would vanish beneath blood. Cal's pulse quickened. He had steered the tide away from prey once. Now he had to shape its hunger into patience. He rose and faced the viewing membrane. Through it, he saw the war barge's prow turn slightly, a gesture almost curious. A single shuttle detached, a dark sea drifting toward the swarm. Carl's augmetics zoomed in. A small craft, no weapons visible, its hull marked with the Inquisition's sigil. His throat tightened. Serac was coming. The choir reacted at once, a hiss of unease rolling through the node. Bioships shifted, sensory fronds tasting the newcomer. Kyle lifted his hands. Hold, he thought, shaping the word into an image. Open palms, a candle unbroken. The hum softened but did not fade. He felt their hunger quiver under the surface, like a predator's muscles tensing. The shuttle entered the perimeter of the swarm. No weapons fired. A living tendril extended from the nearest bioship, curling gently around the craft and guiding it toward the synaptic node. Kyle's heart hammered. He had not told them to do that, yet the gesture felt like his own thought made flesh. A membrane irised open at the far end of the chamber. The shuttle's ramp descended onto the living floor. Serac emerged slowly, unhelmeted, his black coat spattered with frost. His eyes met Kyle's across the glow. In them, Kyle saw no fear, only a cold curiosity, like a man staring into a mirror that breathed. They walked toward each other until only a few steps separated them. The node's pulse slowed, a great animal holding its breath. "Magos Kyle," Serac said softly. "You have changed." Kyle's voice was hoarse. "So have you. You came alone." "I came first," Serac corrected. "My barge waits. Its guns are primed. One word from me, and this swarm dies in holy fire." Kyle gestured to the living walls around them. "One word from me, and it devours you before you speak." For a moment they simply stared. Then Serac exhaled. "And yet here we stand, speaking." Kyle felt the verse stir inside him, urging him to reach out, to absorb this rival as he had absorbed the crystal. He clenched his fists until his augmetic joints creaked. "Why did you follow?" "Because truth is heavier than sanction," Serac said, echoing his earlier message. "Because I had to see whether you had become a heretic or something worse." "I became a bridge," Kyle murmured. Serac's gaze flicked to the glowing veins under Kale's skin. A bridge can be crossed both ways. Another tremor rolled through the node. The choir pressed close, tasting Serac's presence. Cal felt their hunger sharpen, a blade poised to strike. He raised a hand. "Not yet." Serac watched him. "You're controlling them." "I'm guiding them," Cal said. "For now. And when you can't," Cal's throat tightened, "then they will do what hunger does." Serac took a slow step forward. "You found the origin." Cal nodded once. "We made them, exiled them. They learned hunger from us." The Inquisitor's face flickered, not shock, but something like recognition, as if a long-suspected heresy had just become fact. "And now you want to, what? Redeem them, tame them." "I want to remember," Cal said. "If we cannot destroy what we made, we can at least guide it." Serac's lips thinned. "You sound like our old mentor." "I sound like someone who's tired of silence," Cal replied. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the slow pulse of the node. Then Serac spoke quietly. "You could come back, surrender the verse, stand trial, let the Imperium decide." Cal almost laughed. "The Imperium would erase me and this truth. Then the swarm would come as pure instinct. Billions would die, and you would call it victory." Serac's hand twitched near his belt, where a small weapon glimmered. Cal felt the choir tense like drawn bowstrings. He projected an image of still water, a candle unbroken. The tension eased, but not by much. "You can't hold them forever," Serac said. "I don't need forever," Cal murmured. "Just enough to teach them a different path." Serac's eyes narrowed. "And if you fail, then at least they will have heard another song before the end." Silence stretched. Carl felt his mind fray at the edges, the swarm's impressions overlapping his own thoughts. He saw Serac as the swarm saw him, a small heat signature wrapped in iron, a pulse of psychic noise. And as Carl once had. A rival, a mirror, a man who had chosen power over truth. Both visions blurred until Carl no longer knew which was his. He took a step closer. "Help me," he said softly. "You still have a human voice. I still have a human voice. Together we might hold the tide." Serac studied him for a long moment. Then, to Cale's surprise, the Inquisitor lowered his weapon. "Show me," he said. Carl exhaled shakily. He reached out, palm up. Threads of faint light glowed in the air between them. Not tendrils, but resonance. Serac hesitated, then placed his hand above Carl's without touching. For a heartbeat, Carl felt the choir shift, curious. Two minds aligning, not merging. Outside, the fleet adjusted its formation, wings opening slightly, as if tasting a new current. Carl sensed their hunger pause, their attention tilting toward the fragile bridge between the two men. He whispered the old dialect, the lullaby his mother had taught him. Serac's eyes flickered with recognition. Perhaps he remembered it too, from some forgotten world. Together, their voices formed a thin, trembling thread of sound. The choir listened. The node pulsed once, twice. Cal felt the verse inside him resonate with the Inquisitor's presence. A new pattern emerged, not command, but invitation. For an instant the hunger receded, replaced by something like stillness. He glimpsed a vision of the swarm veering away from prey worlds, sliding into the deep void, searching for sustenance among dead suns, rather than living ones. It was only a possibility, fragile as glass, but it existed. He opened his eyes. "Do you feel it?" he asked. Serac's jaw clenched. "I feel something." Kyle allowed himself the smallest smile. "Then maybe we're not too late." But even as he said it, he sensed the strain in the tide, the impatience under the lullaby. Hunger was not gone, only listening. Outside, the escorts around the war barge shifted nervously. One accidental shot, one flare of fear, and the moment would shatter. Cale drew a deep breath. "Hold with me," he whispered. For now, the tide held. The void between fleets held like the pause before a final chord. Bioships hung in concentric rings, their wings arched but still. The war barge floated at the heart of its escort, thrusters idling, its lance batteries dimmed but not powered down. Inside the synaptic node, Carl felt the tide sway against him, restless. The lullaby he and Serac had woven into thought lingered, but began to thin like mist under a rising sun. Hunger waited, patient yet unsatisfied. Every heartbeat stretched into a negotiation older than language. Serac stood beside him, boots sinking slightly into the pulsing floor, jaw tight. His eyes moved from the living walls to Cale's glowing veins, then to the membrane that showed the war barge beyond. "They're not firing," he said quietly. "Why aren't they firing?" "Because they're listening," Carl answered. "Listening isn't the same as obeying." Serac's fingers flexed as if feeling for a weapon. "Your voice is holding them." "For now." Carl closed his eyes. "But they're tasting you, deciding what you are, deciding what we are." The Inquisitor gave a humorless laugh. "I'm surprised they haven't decided already." "They have," Cal said. "They're waiting to see if we know it." A tremor rolled through the node. Cal felt the swarm's mind shift like a great body turning in its sleep. Images flickered behind his eyes. Oceans boiling under alien suns, wings closing over prey, teeth folding around stars. Beneath those images pulsed the verse's rhythm, a fragile thread binding it all. He felt Serac's presence near him, cold but steady, and drew on it as an anchor. "Your barge still has its guns," Cal murmured. "One volley, and this moment ends." Serak's eyes stayed on the membrane. "One volley and the Imperium thinks it's safe. But it isn't." Cal opened his eyes. "Then help me steer them." Serak turned sharply. "Steer them where? Into the void, away from the Imperium until they starve. You think that's mercy?" "It's a beginning," Cal said. "If we can give them another path, even for a time, it buys a chance for something else." "Or it buys them time to grow stronger," Serak countered. "To return sharper than before." Cal almost smiled. "Everything returns sharper, even us." Another tremor, stronger. Outside, one bioship unfurled its sensory fronds fully, a gesture like a spear raised. The choir surged against Carl's mind, impatient. He felt the hunger begin to lick at the edges of his resolve. The verse inside him pulsed painfully, threads tightening around his heart. He pressed his palms to the floor, whispering the old dialect. The glow under his skin brightened, then steadied. The bioship folded its fronds again. The tide pulled back. Serak stared at him. "You're killing yourself doing this." Cal's voice was a rasp. "Maybe, but not today." A membrane opened on the far side of the node. A smaller organism, shaped like a hollowed serpent, glided in, its body lined with bioluminescent veins. Cal sensed its purpose. A messenger. It coiled before him, head lowering in a posture of offering. Inside its open mouth lay a small node of living tissue pulsing faintly. "What is that?" Serak asked. "A synaptic key," Cal said. "A way to speak louder." He hesitated, feeling its pulse echoing his own. If he took it, his link to the swarm would deepen beyond return. If he refused, the tide would slip from his grasp. He looked at Serak. "If I use it, I won't be only me anymore." Serak's jaw tightened. "And if you don't, everything ends." Cal reached out and lifted the node. It dissolved against his palm like warm wax, filaments threading into his veins. A surge of sensation slammed through him. Not pain, but magnitude. The node expanded his mind outward, brushing against every bioship at once. He felt their carapaces flex, their wings tremble, their countless mouths waiting. He stood at the center of a living cathedral of thought. He shaped an image with everything left of his human voice. Not prey but distance, not conquest but wandering. A memory of stars seen from a watch station window, of silence held rather than broken. The swarm received it, rippling with confusion, then curiosity. Hunger paused, tilting its head. Serak stepped back, eyes wide. "What did you show them?" "Home," Cal whispered. "A home that isn't prey." For a long moment nothing moved. Then the fleet shifted, bioships peeling away from the war barge, turning their wings toward the deep void again. The psychic tension eased. Cal sagged to his knees, breath ragged. Light ran along his veins in quick pulses, then settled into a slow glow. He had bought them movement, not surrender, but a step away from slaughter. Serak exhaled slowly. "You actually did it." Cal looked up at him. "No, we did." The Inquisitor's gaze flicked to the living corridor behind them. "And now?" "Now we see if they follow," Cal said. A tremor rolled through the ship, but this time it was not impatience. Cal sensed the swarm aligning with his signal, their formation turning like a great river bending toward a new course. The war barge stayed still, its escorts holding position, guns silent. The void between them widened. Kyle rose unsteadily. "Your chance, Serak. Go back. Tell them what you saw. Tell them we're not lost yet." Serak's eyes narrowed. "You think they'll believe me?" They don't have to believe, Cal said. They only have to hesitate. For a heartbeat, something almost like a smile flickered across the Inquisitor's face. Then it was gone. And you? I go with them, Cal said quietly, as long as they'll listen. Serac studied him, then extended a hand. Cal clasped it, their palms meeting over the pulsing floor. For an instant, Cal felt the verse thread between them, a thin bridge of resonance. Then Serac released him and turned toward the shuttle. You're still a heretic, Serac said without heat. You're still an Inquisitor, Cal replied. Serac paused at the ramp. If you lose yourself, if they turn. I'll remember enough to warn you, Cal said, if I can. Serac gave a short nod and boarded the shuttle. The ramp rose, sealing him inside. The small craft detached from the node and drifted back toward the war barge. Cal watched until it was swallowed by distance. Alone again, he felt the swarm press close, their attention settling fully on him. The verse inside him pulsed once, deep and resonant. He sensed the hunger's question ripple through the choir. Anchor lead where? Cal lifted his gaze to the translucent dome above, where stars shone like frost-bright eyes. Somewhere beyond lay dead suns, cold worlds, drifting carcasses of ancient things, sustenance without slaughter if they could be taught to seek it. He shaped that image into thought, sending it outward like a flare. The fleet responded with a slow, rolling hum. Bioships turned in unison, wings opening like vast sails. The formation angled toward the intergalactic dark, away from the beacon's lure. Cal felt the shift in his bones, a current he could ride but not command. He whispered to himself, to them, to no one. Not pray, not yet. Learn. The node's pulse steadied, wrapping him in a silence so deep it felt like the first breath after drowning. He stood at the center of it, a man carrying a lullaby inside a storm. For now, the tide obeyed. The void between galaxies stretched infinitely, yet Cal felt the passage of distance like a tide washing over his consciousness. Each bioship drifted in quiet arcs, wings folded, sensory fronds extended only slightly, probing the currents of warp and void. The fleet was alive, but not yet hungry. Or, more precisely, it was aware of hunger, patient and deliberate, like a creature sensing prey, yet choosing when to strike. Cal stood at the center of the synaptic node, veins glowing faintly under skin, aware that his pulse had become indistinguishable from the rhythm of the swarm. He was no longer merely observer. He was the tether holding its will in balance. Every tremor of the node carried new impressions. Images of distant worlds flickered in his mind. Planets ruled by the Imperium, gleaming citadels on oceans of dust. Humans going about their lives unaware of the tide that could fall upon them in an instant. The choir pressed these visions against him, testing whether he could remain steady under their weight. He pressed both palms to the living floor, letting its pulse run through him, shaping their attention into gentle eddies instead of violent waves. A flicker of motion in the membrane drew his gaze. Serac's war barge, a dark silhouette among ghost-lighted stars, had shifted closer. The Inquisitor had not acted yet. Perhaps he was observing, testing, waiting. Kyle felt the tension in the swarm, a tightening in the edges of their psychic tendrils. They were aware of the threat, but his presence and the verse maintained the fragile equilibrium. Kyle exhaled slowly, attempting to untangle the pressing thoughts. They are learning restraint, he whispered, though the words were swallowed by the choir. And we are learning with them. The living floor beneath him pulsed brighter, veins of light threading outward. The node responded to the chorus of his mind, translating the human thought into something they could comprehend. He imagined a safe path, not toward prey, not toward conquest, but into the deep void between stars. The swarm shivered in understanding, aligning its trajectory to his intent. A tremor passed through the node, faint but deliberate. Carl felt the impression of a smaller sub-fleet detaching from the main body. The choir pressed closer, testing his ability to guide them without losing the anchor point. He closed his eyes, recalling the memory of the lullaby his mother had sung, blending it with the verse he had carried from the cathedral ship. The twin melodies resonated with the swarm, a harmony woven from human and alien perception alike. The war barge fired a warning pulse, a shimmer across the void that would have sliced a lesser fleet into ruin. Cal felt the reverberation in his skull, a gust of fear from Serac's mind, and responded with a single thought threaded through the chorus. Patience. The pulse dissipated harmlessly. The bioships tilted slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that they understood restraint. Kyle's chest ached. Holding the swarm was not a passive act. It demanded vigilance, constant adjustment of his attention, careful projection of intent. He felt the weight of centuries pressing against him. The original exiles on Tsara's wake, Lyre's sacrifice in the cathedral ship, his father's long-hidden work. Every decision he made now carried echoes that could ripple across worlds. A new sensation rippled through him, the echo of small, scattered nodes embedded in distant bioships. Each one carried fragments of memory, fragments of hunger, and Cale understood that the swarm's understanding of restraint was temporary. They were learning, but not reasoning as he did. Impulses would arise, tests of instinct, moments when patience might fail. He had to remain central, the constant. He moved to the edge of the node's central dais, scanning the formation of the swarm. A single bioship, larger than the rest, adjusted its position. Cal sensed recognition. It had felt the pulse of Serac's war barge and sought guidance, but also felt the pull of hunger, the memory of past prey. Carl raised a hand and focused on the image of the path he had envisioned. Open space, dead suns, the shadowed corridors of intergalactic dark. The ship tilted gently, wings folding in alignment. The pattern spread like water rippling outward, and he felt the choir settle into a rhythm again. Another tremor reached him, faint at first, then growing. Cal realized it came not from the node, but from a distant corner of the fleet. A small contingent had detected a human settlement beyond the Imperium's fringe. The instinct to strike was palpable. He placed both palms on the living floor, sending a clear, precise image. Observe. Do not strike. The impression rippled outward. The small contingent hesitated, their wings folding slightly, their mandibles retreating from projected action. Kyle exhaled in relief, though it was fleeting. Patience was fragile. Hunger could return at any moment, a storm capable of undoing everything. He felt the swell of the node beneath him, a pulse stronger than before. The swarm tested his will once more, as though it wanted to ensure the anchor remained steady. He drew a deep breath, threading the lullaby and the verse into a single harmonic projection. It was not control, not command, but invitation. The image he wove carried the memory of restraint, of careful choice, and the echo of human conscience. The swarm followed, not because it had to, but because it recognized him as part of its rhythm. Carl opened his eyes to see the fleet aligned, concentric arcs held firm. The distant stars shone faintly through the translucent membrane, casting pale streaks of light across the living floor. He sensed Serac watching from afar, waiting, calculating. The Inquisitor's presence was sharp, intrusive, yet manageable. Cale's mind braced against the intrusion, threading the swarm's attention into stability. Minutes passed. The fleet drifted further into the intergalactic void. Each ship moved as if breathing, wings flexing in unison. The node beneath Carl pulsed steadily, reinforcing the anchor. Outside, the war barge remained at a distance, weapons idle, its presence a reminder of the fragile truce. Kyle sank to his knees, pressing his hands to the floor. His glowing veins dimmed slightly as the strain lessened. He allowed himself a moment of clarity, though brief. He had bought time, perhaps a day, perhaps a week, enough for him to guide, for the swarm to learn, for the Imperium to remain ignorant just a little longer. Every heartbeat felt like a promise held taut, every breath a negotiation with existence itself. He closed his eyes, letting the lullaby thread through him once more. In the quiet, he sensed not only patience, but a nascent understanding. The choir was learning to follow without devouring, to perceive without consuming. Cal allowed a single faint smile. For now, the tide was held, the anchor secure. Yet even as he exhaled, he knew it was temporary. Hunger was not gone. Instinct would rise again, impatience would return, and the moment of reckoning, when patience would fail, would come. Kyle pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the pulse of the verse still alive within him. He whispered quietly to the choir, to himself, to the void, "Hold, just a little longer." The fleet drifted on. Kyle remained at its heart, fragile and luminous, a single conscience within a sea of instinct, and for the first time since Zara's wake, he allowed himself the faintest hope that he might guide the tide just enough to avert catastrophe. The void had changed its weight. Cal felt it in every pulse of the synaptic node, in every whisper of the choir threading through his mind. The bioships had shifted into patterns of wary grace, their wings folding and fanning in perfect arcs. Yet the tension behind those arcs was palpable. Something had moved beyond observation. Emotion, deliberate, calculating, and entirely alien. Carl pressed his palms to the living floor and felt the swarm's cognition ripple like a dark tide through him. Hunger had noticed the Imperium's presence again, and the moment of decision had arrived. He turned his attention toward the shimmer in the membrane ahead. There, a war barge had emerged fully into real space, its prow glowing with golden lances. Serac stood at the bridge, unmoving, eyes sharp, observing the swarm like a man waiting to cut a river with a knife. The Inquisitor's craft radiated tension, and Kyle felt it as an intrusion upon the choir, a subtle pulse of aggression layered over his anchor. "Do you feel it?" Cal whispered aloud, though the choir answered more than any human voice could. Its tendrils shivered against his consciousness. The swarm sensed threat, curiosity, and a hint of recognition, its collective awareness turning toward the challenge. Kyle inhaled, bracing himself. This was the fulcrum. One choice could unravel all he had held. He moved to the central dais, feet sinking into the pulsing living floor. The node beneath him throbbed in anticipation. Images flashed in his mind, planets torn to rubble by unbridled instinct, bloodied cities under alien suns, and the countless echoes of exiled bio-prototypes multiplying across the void. At the center of it all, he saw himself, a fragile red-robed figure whose decisions could steer billions toward death, or, for a moment, toward mercy. The Inquisitor's shuttle detached from the war barge, moving with measured precision. Cal felt the pulse of human intent reach him, an urgent vibration demanding immediate reaction. Serac's presence pressed like a cold weight on his consciousness, yet Carl remained tethered to the chorus. He projected a single thought outward. Observe. Do not strike. The nearest bioships hesitated. Fronds flexed and wings folded slightly, an acknowledgement that the anchor was steady. Carl's heart thudded. A mistake, a tremor of panic, and the swarm would erupt, devouring both pursuer and prey. Yet he held his calm, shaping thought into a melody of restraint, of memory, of possibility. A new presence approached within the choir's periphery. Another fragment, massive and ancient, coalescing from the outer reaches of the fleet. Kel recognized its psychic weight immediately. A brood leader, one of the first exiles, older than the cathedral ship that had birthed the verse. Its awareness brushed against him, probing, questioning, testing whether the anchor could endure the strain. Carl reached deep within the verse, threading his consciousness like a needle through the loom of their minds. He whispered a memory, the lullaby of a human world that had long since fallen to dust. The brood leader paused, then folded its wings, aligning with the fleet's slow arc. A ripple of relief passed through Cale's mind, though it was tinged with dread. He sensed a potential fracture. The longer the brood held, patience, the more intense the hunger in the outer flanks became. One wrong projection, one lapse of attention, and a cascade of instinct could shatter everything. Kyle turned toward the approaching shuttle. Serac's presence intensified. He could feel the Inquisitor's strategy unfold. A feint, a test, a threat without action. Kyle's mind twisted with the possibilities. If he oversteered, he risked teaching the swarm to anticipate human tactics, shaping their hunger into something calculated, unstoppable. If he understeered, instinct might erupt uncontrollably. Every decision was a knife's edge. He drew a breath, letting the lullaby and the verse harmonize into a single resonant thread. With a mental gesture, he sent the pattern outward, focusing not on attack or defense, but on memory. The memory of restraint, the memory of purpose, the memory of what had been lost and must not be forgotten. The swarm responded, wings fanning and bodies aligning, a ripple of obedience across the tide of instinct. Serac's shuttle hovered, sensors scanning the node. Cal projected another subtle pattern. A pulse of calm over the swarm, a visual of stars glimpsed from a watch station window, distant suns that burned quietly rather than devouring all around them. The outer bioships flexed, sensing the balance, then held their positions. The threat had been acknowledged and deferred. The brood leader moved closer to the central node. Cal felt its immense presence press against him, testing the tether. Memories of the early exiles flashed before his mind. The first splits, the hidden laboratories, the exiled prototypes drifting into the void. Cal's pulse accelerated. If he faltered, the swarm might follow instinct over memory. He pressed deeper, threading both human and alien consciousness into a single cord of restraint. A hum rose in the node, higher and brighter, and Kyle sensed the anchor solidify. The chorus of tendrils, wings, and fronds tuned to the pattern he projected. The brood leader pulsed once, then aligned fully with the formation. For a fleeting moment, the tide of hunger had bent to will rather than instinct. Kyle felt exhaustion press on his mind and body. He had tethered not only the swarm, but also the fragile thread of patience holding Serac at bay. One lapse, one flicker of thought, and the fragile accord could collapse. Yet in that moment of balance he glimpsed possibility. A path through hunger that did not end in wholesale devastation. Serac's voice echoed faintly through the membrane. words transmitted psychically. You've held them, for now. Kale's lips twitched. Patience is temporary, he said softly, and the swarm does not forget. The Inquisitor nodded once. I understand. We can buy a moment, nothing more. Kyle pressed his hands to the floor again, feeling the node pulse beneath him. The bioships remained steady, their massive forms aligned, wings flexed but idle. The brood leader hovered near, the center, attuned fully to the verse threaded through Kale's veins. For now, order held, though he knew it was fragile. A faint memory surfaced. The child on Karen's reach, black-eyed and silent, releasing spores like prayers. The astropath's scream, the cathedral ship's pulse. Every echo converged into a single truth. Restraint was only possible through vigilance, sacrifice, and the careful shaping of instinct into something almost human. Kyle exhaled, faintly smiling. He had tethered the tide, held it in check long enough to teach restraint. For the first time since Zara's wake, he allowed himself the smallest hope. The swarm might learn to follow without consuming, to perceive without destroying. But he knew the moment of fracture would come, and he would have to choose again, at the fulcrum of instinct and conscience. For now, though, he remained the anchor, luminous and fragile, a single human thread woven into an ocean of alien instinct. The fleet drifted silently, poised between hunger and patience, and Kyle, glowing veins pulsing in time with the synaptic node, waited for the next move. The void was no longer silent. Every pulse of the node beneath Kyle throbbed like a heartbeat, pressed into a drum, each vibration echoing through the fleet. Bioships flexed in tense arcs, wings spreading slightly, fronds brushing the currents, as if tasting the imperceptible shift in intent. Hunger was aware now, not merely as instinct, but as a consciousness testing limits, probing Kale's resolve. He pressed his palms to the living floor, letting the hum of the node anchor him, even as his mind threatened to fray under the pressure. The war barge had closed distance, its golden lances shimmering faintly in the void. Serac's presence was sharp in Kale's mind, a knife edge of thought slicing through the chorus. He sensed the Inquisitor's calculations, a flanking maneuver, a targeted strike, a possible capture. Kyle knew he had no time for hesitation. The tide would not wait, and the human voice threading restraint through billions of instincts was already strained near breaking. Hold, he whispered, threading the word through the verse embedded in his veins. The choir reacted instantly, a wave of subtle adjustments in wing, frond, and carapace. Hunger tilted, but did not strike. Kyle exhaled sharply. Every moment counted. A single lapse would trigger a chain reaction, an eruption of instinct that could scatter the fleet or obliterate the war barge in fury. The brood leader approached the synaptic node, its presence immense, its pulse resonating like a low organ tone that reverberated through Kale's bones. He felt the weight of countless millennia compressed into a single consciousness brushing his own. Images flickered in his mind. Laboratories ablaze with forbidden experiments. Exiled prototypes drifting across cold voids. The cathedral ship's sacrifice. Lyrae's hand guiding the verse. Every memory, every echo of human intervention pressed against him. You are the anchor, the choir whispered, not in words, but as impressions shaping his thoughts. Kyle's lips moved reflexively, forming a prayer he could barely recognize, the lullaby threading through his mind like a silver cord. The brood leader paused, its fronds trembling as if tasting the melody. A ripple of response spread outward. The fleet shifted in unison, adjusting its formation, still tethered to the human voice guiding it. Through the membrane, he glimpsed the war barge deploying auxiliary drones, smaller vessels armed with lances and psychic dampeners. The choir quivered at the intrusion. Kyle's pulse accelerated. He could feel the swarm's attention divide, curiosity flickering alongside instinct. One false impression, one misaligned thought, and the tide would erupt, consuming all. He closed his eyes, threading his intent with precision. Observe, do not strike, delay, do not devour yet. The pulse beneath him strengthened, a living heartbeat expanding through the node. Kyle felt the glow beneath his skin intensify, tendrils of light coiling through his arms like the roots of a tree drawing sustenance. His voice, his intent, carried through every sensory frond, every winged membrane, shaping reaction into patience. Hunger, aware but constrained, held its course. A tremor of sensation flared at the edge of the swarm. Distant bioships moving independently, testing limits. Kyle directed the verse toward them, layering it with the memory of restraint, the memory of human guidance. They faltered, wings folding as the chord resonated through them. The tide bent subtly, aligning with his anchor. He felt a measure of relief, but knew it was fragile, temporary. The war barge shifted again. Kyle perceived Sirach's intent, a test of will, a calculated strike to provoke instinct. The Inquisitor was not attacking yet, only probing. Kyle drew a deep breath, threading thought and memory into the chorus with careful precision. Images of distant suns, dead planets, and watch stations flickered behind his eyes. The swarm responded, pausing, tempering hunger with recognition. Kyle's mind strained under the effort. He felt each ship's cognition brush his consciousness like wind over water, the brood leader's pulse anchoring the pattern, the smaller bioships testing the limits. He pressed the lullaby and the verse into the node, creating a network of restraint that reached through the swarm's vast mind. The node pulsed in response, alive with intention, vibrating under his feet like a living drum. The moment stretched. Kyle sensed every possibility. The swarm could erupt, Sirach could fire, the fleets could clash. Each scenario pressed against him, demanding resolution. Yet he held, threading intent through instinct, shaping patience into a fragile web. Hunger tilted, considered, and then recoiled, not defeated, but deferred. A new impression reached Kyle. Distant signals from auxiliary, nodes in the swarm's flanks, sensing prey far beyond the war barge. Instinct tugged, a low current of desire. He pressed the memory of restraint deeper, folding it into the swarm's awareness. They hesitated, wings folding slightly, fronds coiling in acknowledgement. The cord held. For now, the tide obeyed. Kyle fell to his knees, hands pressed to the pulsing floor, glowing veins throbbing with the effort. He felt the choir's attention relax, the brood leader shifting to maintain balance. A faint sense of calm filled him, though he knew it was tenuous. Hunger would return, curiosity would rise, and the moment of fracture was inevitable. He lifted his gaze to the membrane. The war barge hovered still, weapons idle, sensors scanning. Sirach's presence pressed against him, sharp and intrusive, but he had shaped the tide. The Inquisitor's mind paused at the threshold, perhaps sensing the chorus of restraint woven through billions of instincts. Kyle whispered to himself, to the swarm, to the void. Patience is not surrender. Observe, but do not devour. The bioships flexed their wings, drifting in arcs that carried them farther from the beacon's lure. The brood leader pulsed once, acknowledging the human thread that anchored them. He exhaled, a breath heavy with exhaustion and relief. For the first time in the long stretch of this engagement, he allowed himself to sense the possibility of control, not dominance, but guidance. The swarm was still hunger, still instinct, still vast and unknowable. Yet it had listened, if only for a fleeting instant, to memory threaded by human intent. Carl pressed his palms to the node one last time. The floor pulsed beneath him, steadying him. Tendrils retracted slightly, the node's glow softening but steady. He felt the verse within him pulse gently, a heartbeat aligned with the swarm's rhythm. For now, the tide had held. For now, restraint had endured. Kyle allowed himself a faint, fragile smile. Beyond the membrane, the void stretched endlessly, yet within that stretch, he had carved a moment of equilibrium, a pause between instinct and consequence. The swarm moved in silence, wings and fronds flexing in harmony, the brood leader anchoring the formation. Serac's war barge remained at the edge of perception, silent, observing, a reminder of the fragile truce. Kyle, luminous and human, yet more than human, remained at the center, a single thread woven into an ocean of instinct, guiding it, balancing it, living it. He whispered once more, "Hold, observe, remember." The node pulsed gently. The swarm obeyed. The void stretched endlessly, cold and silent, yet within it a tide moved with measured precision. Kyle stood at the heart of the synaptic node, veins faintly glowing beneath his skin, the choir's resonance woven into the marrow of his bones. Outside, the bioships glided in concentric arcs, wings folding and fanning with a rhythm dictated not by instinct alone, but by the human thread he had become. Hunger still pulsed, latent, waiting for the slightest lapse. Yet for a moment, it was tamed, held by memory, by intent, by sacrifice. Serac's war barge remained at the edge of real space, weapons primed but idle. The Inquisitor's presence was a constant pressure, a knife edge of thought slicing through Kyle's mind. Every pulse from the node, every vibration of the choir, responded to both him and Serac, balanced precariously, like a thread stretched over a chasm. Kyle's chest ached with the effort. He was no longer simply human, no longer merely anchor. He was the bridge, the tether, the conscience threading through a vast sea of alien instinct. The choir shifted, as if sensing a new presence. From the distance, subfleets detached, minor clusters flexing their wings, sensing the edges of the void for prey. Cal projected a single thought. Observe. Delay. Do not devour yet. The bioships paused, fronds quivering. Even the youngest clusters halted, a testament to the resonance he carried. Yet he knew it was only temporary. Hunger would rise again. Instinct would test patience. One misalignment of intent, and billions of lives could be undone. He pressed both palms to the living floor, the node's pulse thrumming against his hands, through his arms, into the veins glowing beneath his skin. He reached deep, threading memory into the chorus. Images of human worlds glimpsed from a watch station, of the cathedral ship's sacrifice, of Lyrae guiding the verse, of his father whispering secrets of creation and exile. The images wove together into a single harmonic projection, carrying restraint into the swarm's mind, tempering instinct with recollection. Serac's psychic presence pressed again. The Inquisitor had shifted closer, scanning the swarm, testing the limits of Kale's control. Cal felt a ripple of tension in the outer bioships. Hunger stirred at the edge, brushing against the restraint with curiosity, testing whether he could maintain the anchor. He inhaled slowly, threading his intent with precision, shaping patience into form. The tide held. A tremor passed through the node, faint at first, then sharper. Cal sensed the brood leader nearing the central platform, its vast presence pressing against him. Images flickered. The first exiles, the vaults on Zara's wake, the cathedral ship, spore forms drifting into the void. Kyle's mind strained under the weight of centuries compressed into a single instant. He had carried the anchor long enough. Now the moment of reckoning approached. A flash of light drew his gaze to the membrane. Serac had deployed a single assault shuttle, a test, a message of potential annihilation. Kyle felt the choir ripple with awareness, instinct rising, curiosity brushing against discipline. He pressed the memory of restraint deeper, infusing it with every image of worlds spared, of humans whose lives had value beyond the sum of instinct. The shuttle hovered, then retreated slightly. The pulse of the node steadied once more. Cal sank to one knee, feeling the strain in every tendon, every thought. He had held the swarm's attention, shaped its hunger, and created a bridge across instinct and memory. But he knew the cost. Each moment of guidance thinned his own sense of self. Each thread of restraint entwined more deeply with the chorus until the human voice was faint against the tide. He whispered softly, a prayer, a lullaby, a thread of human memory threading the chorus. Hold, observe, remember. The brood leader hovered near the node, its massive body radiating latent hunger. Kyle met its awareness, threading his intent like a delicate needle. He projected not command, but invitation. Patience, observation, delay. The choir, the swarm, all trembled in response, wings folding slightly, fronds coiling in acknowledgement. Hunger did not vanish. It bent to the verse, curious, testing, waiting. He rose unsteadily, glowing veins pulsing with the effort. Beyond the membrane, the void stretched cold and deep, and he glimpsed the fleet's outer arcs shifting in response to his intent. The Inquisitor remained at the edge, still, silent, observing. Kyle felt the weight of potential failure press against him, but he could not retreat. To step back would be to surrender the tide, to allow instinct to prevail. The memory of the child on Curran's reach rose unbidden, black-eyed and silent, releasing spores like prayers. The astropath's scream, the cathedral ship, Lyre's sacrifice, the original exiles, all converged into a single thread of truth. Cal felt the chorus coalesce around it, instinct tempered by memory, hunger shaped by human intent. He whispered again, lead, not devour, guide, not destroy. A tremor ran through the fleet as the outer bioships tested the edges of the pattern. Carl projected a subtle reinforcement, threading images of restraint, of worlds glimpsed but untouched, of suns shining without predation. The tide of instinct bent, curling around the memory, forming a delicate lattice of compliance. Serac's presence remained, a sharp intrusion against the chorus. Kel could feel the Inquisitor's mind probing, calculating, weighing threat against obedience. He allowed the thought to thread outward. Recognition, observation, deference. The war barge paused, weapons idle, awaiting the outcome. Kyle exhaled slowly. For the first time since leaving Tsara's wake, he allowed himself to sense a fragile equilibrium. The swarm had bent to memory, patience, and intent. The human thread had endured, though he knew it would fray again with time. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the verse pulse beneath skin, a heartbeat entwined with the choir. A distant light flickered beyond the membrane. The swarm's arcs shifted subtly, veering away from known prey, moving into the deep void between galaxies. Instinct still throbbed, hunger still whispered, but for this moment, order held. Cal allowed himself a faint, fragile smile. He turned his gaze inward, feeling the node's pulse sync with his own. He was human still, though more than human, luminous and fragile, an anchor woven into a sea of instinct. The chorus hummed around him, waiting, learning, aware of the thread that could break or hold. Kyle whispered once more, "Patience, observe, remember." The void held its breath. The swarm obeyed. The verse pulsed, luminous and patient, a fragile harmony threaded through instinct and memory. For the first time, Kyle felt the faintest hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could guide hunger without losing himself entirely. The galaxy waited, silent. The ocean of instinct flowed, and Kyle, human, luminous, and alone, remained at its heart, the anchor, the bridge, the conscience threading through a tide older than stars.